It's really amazing for me, people that you came here for my presentation, even that it is after 6 p.m. and I presume that most of your friends are drinking beer in Forum Przestrzenie or maybe here. So it means a lot to me. My name is Michał Matysiak. I'm a senior associate in Squire Patton Boggs. This is a law firm with multinational presence, mostly based in United States and in the UK. I am a senior associate in the IT technology data protection practice. Okay, and today we'll discuss very interesting topic. This is due diligence process and how to provide some really good outcome from that. I've divided my presentation on 5 parts. First and the last are pretty standard, but the second, third, and fourth are really essential. I will start with really basics because I want us to be on the same page. After that, I tell you something more about most common findings revealed by due diligence, and after that, I prepared something to some kind of tips and guides how to fix legal shortfalls or address them in transactional documentation. So this is our game plan. And first thing, game dev is, I think, now one of the still one of the hottest branch of tech industry. I think COVID-19 really accelerated that process. I know now there is maybe a little bit more hard times because of, for example, in Poland, due to a geopolitical situation and situation besides our eastern border. But I don't know whether you were able to participate in the panel about IPOs on 3 p.m. But during this panel, you could hear a lot of very heartwarming words about possibilities and some kind of market cycles. So I think now, despite the fact that there is a lot of layoffs, there is also a lot of possibilities. And of course, due diligence process is a cornerstone of every good transaction, every good VC, however we call that. So it's something really really important. On this slide, I've prepared some kind of list of largest game dev related M&A deals from recent years. And what is very important is the fact that those deals covered only deals above 1 billion. So there is a lot more above 100 million US dollars, and I think even more over, for example, $10 million. So there still is a market. A lot of is happening. So this is still important topic, and I think due diligence is not only important because it's related to transaction, but also you can do it in your company for some kind of cleaning purposes, because, for example, you want to audit some processes. I've provided you some kind of basic definition. I think I try to find the easiest and the shortest one. As I said, is due diligence is an integral phase of a transaction, and this is a really comprehensive appraisal of a business undertaken by prospective buyer, especially to establish its assets and liabilities and evaluate its commercial potential. I think the most important thing in every transaction is for both sides to know which assets are of real value for investor. Because it's influence in future, for example, some kind of feel for negotiation and for some kind of adjustments. But as I said, it's not only a matter of VCs and mergers and acquisitions, but also target it provides some benefits for this party, because for example the company could find some kinds of faulty processes, some kind of issues that may be litigation in the future, some kind of economic financial situation that maybe it's not visible due, for example, to good economy, but in the future, in the bad times, maybe it will lead to, for example, some kind of doom times. Here you can see the case of the person that really thinks about her money and her future and choose to make some kind of DD, maybe not really extensive, but as far as I heard, it was only like one question or something like that, and maybe some kind of advisory from lawyers. And I don't use Taylor Swift because it's Taylor Swift pop singer and it's funny because it's her. No, I think it's a really good example that that even people that are not really related to the financial market or legal market choose sometimes to be more thorough and they want to really check what will be maybe their future problem, and that leads her to not signing some kind of contract in relation to some kind of sponsorship deal with FTX. Now I choose three most common scenarios of due diligence performance. First one is merger and acquisition. This is the process when investor usually overtake 100% of the company, but of course we can use this name also for a little bit not so big sites takeover. But of course I've provided here also some kind of definition for investments and divestments. Divestments is the situation when business decides to sell off one of its segments, non-core business offices, some kind of assets. This process may be, for example, a necessity due to some kind of economic situation or maybe some kind of restructurization within the whole company's group. So this is this is three most important and the most common scenarios when you use due diligence as a process. Because when I tell you about due diligence, it's not something like an audit prepared, like for example, every year by big companies that you, for example, need to do to, for example, provide some kind of reporting to commercial companies. It's more like a process of auditing the whole business, similar to other industries. An investment in game dev and TT is usually preceded also by thorough examination of the company. As we heard today, there were situations when, for example, companies can pitch some investors without some kind of slideshows and just talk. But now, after a lot of headlines in Western newspapers, especially from the USA, about, for example, this FTX situation, and for example about these Swiss banks. I think investor will be more thorough when it comes to due diligence. It's due diligence is, as I said, is the cornerstone of every transaction, because it's not only thing that you can use to evaluate your risk, but also is some kind of tool to sometimes reflected in the future in targets evaluation, as well as, for example, construction of the deal, because sometimes you need to make more paperwork to cover some kind of legal issues, and to include some kind of reps and warranties to be in help in the future. But of course, a company that is planning to attract investor may also use this tool without any, for example, investment in the future, but only to make some kind of cleaning activities and checking whether everything is good. This is very good option because in the future, when the real investor will come, she will see that, for example, a lot of legal issues, financial issues are solved, and there is no problem, and maybe there is still no problem, and maybe you got a better valuation of your company. So timing in due diligence is important, and I think it's one of the aspects of negotiation strategy and business psychology. Because, for example, if you already prepared some kinds of due diligence, maybe some kind of other checks in your company, usually your company now is in a better condition, looks better, and you can for example, receive better offer. But usually, and I think this is scenario in 1995 cases, due diligence usually starts when both parties have agreed in principle to a deal, but have not yet signed any binding agreements. But of course, they usually sign some kind of letter of intent or non-disclosure agreements because they want to make the whole negotiation process pretty safe. Now maybe we can go to the really to the slide that I think is best description of the situation after the due diligence. So the founder is on the left side. I don't know whether you know, this is the scene from Godfather 1 when Marlon Brando says, "Look at him! Look how they massacre my boy." And I think this is very good description how founders very often feel after they received first draft or, for example, due diligence report from other sides, because there is a lot of red flags, findings, maybe some kind of important, maybe less important, but there is a lot of bad things about your company. Maybe it's not like in every case it is like this, but I think you need to remember this is one thing about psychology in the transaction process, that you must remember that other party is not your friend and they want to make some profit on your company. And on the right side, Ice Cube with a face like, what the man, because there is a lot of issues like, for example, how is possible that you make it happen, that something is so wrong in your company. But usually investors are really professional and they know that there should be some mistakes, because sometimes some mistakes are market standard. Here I provide you with I think the most easiest set of due diligence areas. It's a financial, commercial, tax, and legal due diligence. Financial due diligence its scope is mainly on, for example, quality of earning. This is, for example, this is the part when you, for example, check sources of income and whether they are, for example, like recurring or maybe ongoing. And the second example is quality of assets, because, as I said at the beginning, quality of assets is one of the most important thing, and you need to know the value in the transaction where it lays. So, for example, what is really important, what's important for investor, and usually in gaming company these assets, maybe let's not call it assets, but the most important things that investor want to obtain is some kind of IP rights or people, because I think the most important and the most valuable assets in IT or in game dev industry are talented people that work in your company, because with your capable squad you can make everything come true. So besides of that, there's also commercial due diligence. This is something that usually investors do with help of his employees, of other people. He asks some question, checks market, etc. Tax due diligence is pretty obvious. And the last one, the most important for me, because I'm a lawyer, is a legal due diligence. I've chosen three parts that are most important. This is litigations, liabilities, and of course ownership structure regarding company and assets. And this is the part when I've chose four scopes that will be maybe described a little bit thorough. I choose that I will tell you more about corporate fundings, and after that about IP, GDPR, and labor fundings. Okay, so first thing we start with, I think the most maybe not the hardest one, the hardest part, because other parts are also sometimes really hard to describe and to make the good investigation. Like, for example, when we're talking about some kind of technology issues or checking, for example, ownership of IP. But when we're talking about corporate matters, so it will vary depending on the type of company, because we have a lot of public listed companies, smaller companies with companies with limited liabilities. So every due diligence will be really like tailor-made suit. So you need to really understand the whole company structures, and I will provide you more information in the next slides about the situation when this is very important. And of course, in addition to examining obvious issues like title to shares, auditing, some kind of financial documents, resolution of bodies, or other actions of, for example, your management boards. Issues that a lot of issues, for example, is with need to be important. But for example, so this is, I think, almost impossible to provide some kind of closed list on matters that could be covered by due diligence. And first thing, and the most important, and I think it is checked every time, is title to shares. And it starts with legal analysis of document on basis of which title to shares was transferred, the existence of shares, and to determine whether and to what rights are incorporated in these shares. And of course, there is some kind of rule of law that, for example, regulates what shares can incorporate, but there is also a lot of, there is a field, for example, that you can change some issues, or maybe you can provide some kind additional obligation to shareholders. So it's not like straightforward that you can just look to the act and look to the some kind of register of shares and said, okay, so that's all. And of course, as I said, verification of the title that the seller holds to the shares. And after that, examination of the legal form of the transfers of the company's shares in the past, because usually there is a lot of cases in the history of company when the shares change their owner. And after that, of course, in the case of stocks and registered, for example, on the for example stock exchange market companies, there is a lot more to change. You need to check a lot more documents, and you need to be really thorough in that. And I think this is the most important part of this section of my deck. This is about startup agreement, because as I know, a lot of game dev companies started in that situation. And why this is important? Because sometimes construction of startups article of association and other documents that regulating some kind of relationship between shareholders are not 100% standard, and there is, as I said, a room, for example, to include additional obligation, for example, to contribute more in the company, or to cyclically increase in share capital. But so this is really important, because also those articles of association may include some kinds of rules, like, for example, right of first refusal, the right of priority, the right to join the divestiture, or other, which may be the case for the next possible owner, that makes sometimes impossible for the next owner to invest in the company, because, for example, there is need for some kind of sufficient number of shareholders' rights that, for example, vote for that situation. And besides of that, also very important case, because every company needs money, needs financing. So sometimes they may leverage financing of the capital of the resulting company, but, for example, making some kind of collaterals on assets. Often in this type of situation, lenders secure themselves by placing encumbrances on the company's assets or rights. And why this is so problematic? Because it's not uncommon for the transaction to require, for example, to approval of the third-party lenders for the company's operation. And this may be really difficult sometimes for the company to make some moves without some consents. And now we'll move on to intellectual property. As you can see here, almost everything that is created during the game development process can be considered intellectual property. I added here some kind of little star after almost everything, because this is some kind of really, because I want to make it really basic, and this is the view of a lawyer, that you need to think that really everything can be some kind of work within the meaning of Polish Act on Copyrights, but it's not really it's not in 100% true, because protection because copyrighted works means usually and these rights protect form expression or of the game idea when it's creative and individual in nature. I think we don't have today enough time to discuss this, because it's like very very doctrine speaking and very like talking about some kinds of rules of law, but I think you need to consider all creation as within the game development as some kind of creative and covered by IP. And of course, the company should hold the rights to the game and the all elements of the game. We've heard a lot. We've heard something about AI during Michał's presentation that was before mine. So this is really really important that that you need to have some kind of level of certainty that you own the IP, and this is important because in Poland our law is a little bit different, for example, than UK on, or for example, regulation from the United States. And Polish law requires that a contract for transferring property copyrights or economic copyrights, whatever we call them in English, be in writing, and that if specific fields of exploitation be described. Besides of that, when we don't have this contractual regulation, in case of some kind of employment contracts, there is also some kind of rules in the act that describe the whole transfer of IP. But if you want to have some kind of certainty what you really obtain during the whole process of your employee's work, you usually need to have additional clause in your contract that describe to what extent and what you obtain, because you don't want to leave any space for some kind of uncertainty. It's also important because, for example, if there is any fault in that transfer, it leads to the situation when you can be like treated as some kind of non-exclusive licensee, which is very undesirable situation, and it could create a lot of risks. I've mentioned here a few other important matters, like, for example, during DD, you can discover that there is some kind of claims of infringement from third parties. Of course, this point covers also issues with open source licenses. Sometimes AI-generated content is also something that you need to think about, and maybe something more from the administration side, like some kind of faults in registration procedures in relation to trademarks. And of course, some issues like, for example, when companies don't really protect their trade secrecy and confidentiality of the projects, because, for example, if you work on your really top secret projects and sometimes other companies get to know, especially if this is some kind of indie game that could be, for example, produced in relatively short time, it may lead to some kinds of really IP troubles and to litigation finally. On this slide, I prepared some kind of information about next area. This is employment. This is very important thing in Poland because we have a lot of regulation that covers employment, and of course there is a wide range of staffing matters. For example, like keeping working hours in line, like, for example, using third-party service providers, or for example, sometimes problems with qualification of specific person as employer or not, despite contract of this person is for example civil law contract, like for example service agreement, but there is a numerous of situation when that could be a problem. And of course there is also related areas, like, for example, social security, taxation, and data protection. Here I've prepared some kinds of, for me, the most important cases, like for example, outsourcing, crunch, and non-compete, non-solicitation, and non-confidentiality clauses, because, for example, there is a lot space in Polish reality for outsourcing, because I think maybe not every big company, but I think many of them use outsources, such, for example, as actors, screenwriters, musicians, graphic designers, to work on specific games. And sometimes when we see how they work, how many they work, what is, for example, their relation with some kinds of project managers, it really looks like an employment. And sometimes that might lead to additional problem, because employees, of course, has more rights, like for example, right to annual leave, etc. And in civil law contract, of course, you can add it, but this is another thing that possibly could be considered as making some kind of moves to avoid employment contract and avoid public contributions, like for example those made for our health services. Crunch it's pretty obvious. This is a big problem in game development. And the last point, it's related to for example moves like stealing employees, or for example competing with specific company, and of course some kind of confidentiality matter. These three areas should be regulated in the contract with developers, if you want to feel safe. Next area is data protection. I think the industry increased awareness of data protection regulation, and in the fact the problem is now that this is no longer the problem is no longer implementation, but its correctness. Despite of the harmonization of regulations in Poland due to GDPR, there is still some space for specific topics that are regulated in our law, like for example monitoring of employees. And of course during the game industry development, the amount of data collected by gaming industry is now much more developed than at the beginning. So now I think data protection is one of the most important legal issue in due diligence. And here you can find some kind of examples which data are collected in games. This is not like, for example, a template that is used every time, because it really depends from the game. But for example, like user account data, or for example, in-game communication data, it's really often. And I chose 6 most important red flags and areas that are covered by data protection red flags. I think first thing is improper fulfillment of information obligation with respect to data subjects. Like for example, you make some kind of mistakes in your information clause that you provide to your employees. For example, you use wrong legal basis for processing of data. Next things, faults in sharing and transferring data to data processor. For example, you do it without any agreement. You do it without any certainty that, for example, they add any secure measures. Or for example, very important and very not often considered, this is faults in processing children's data. There is some kind of specific regulations that covers this area, and you should remember about that. Now I've prepared some kind of graph that describe what can you do with findings and findings hash red flags, and how can you divide it? I divided it on two categories, reparable and unreparable. When we're talking about reparable findings, we can divide it further on actions of the actions that only requires some kind of activity from company, managers, etc., and on activity that needs third-party participation. For example, when you need to sign additional document with your contractor, or for example, you need to talk with your employees about their agreement and your faulty IP clause that needs to be updated. And the second category, unreparable, I think we can divide it further on two categories: entirely unreparable and actions and the situation cases when repetition of actions can happen. And I will provide you more information about that on the next slides. And we start with some kind of list, some kind of example of issues that could show off in due diligence process. And of course, this is only when you look at solution. It's only like examples. It could be 1,000 more, maybe not 1,000, but a few more better options. But I just to make you some good examples. What can you do with these legal issues? For example, you find out that the IP transfer agreement with the contractor was concluded without specifying the fields of exploitation, and of course, the law of this contract is the Polish one. So, for example. You, as the investor, can ask the seller to annex contracts with selected contractors. It's called remedial agreements. And for example, when the company has assets that the purchaser would like to exclude from the transaction. For example, during one transaction, I meet the situation when the company owns a helicopter or cars of the owners of the company. So you can create an organized business part and make some kind of separation from the company. But there can be further practical problems with those findings. For example, the target can take some remedial actions. Of course, you can, for example, conclude new agreements, but the third party, for example, your employee or your contractor, does not want to cooperate. What can you do? Now, for example, you can conclude an appropriate settlement. This is one option, but usually it involves money. Or, for example, you can assess the risk and secure it somehow. For example, establishing an escrow account to cover, for example, future claims. Other case is like, for example, as part of the due diligence process, specific data or documents has not been provided. But this is not the case. Like, for example, company acts in bad faith because they don't. But this is a very long process. Sometimes it happens, and of course, or even there is a situation like, for example, you want to achieve some kind of administration certificates, and this is not, for example, possible in a short period of time. So of course, you can, for example, make some kind of appraisal of legal risk, and for example, include relevant reps and warranties in the scope of the SPA. And the last one, for example, there is a new regulation coming into effect that requires implementation, and the date of implementation is similar to that date that you choose for your closing date. This is the date when you signed the share purchase agreement. For example, usually it depends on the arrangement of the parties, the amount of time, etc. But I think I will recommend that you can include this in your pre-closing actions and ask the current owner to implement those regulations. And of course, when we're talking about unreparable findings, as I said before, I've divided it on two situations. this one that are not completely remediable, and these that are that there is possible that cannot be repaired with, for example, some kind of annex or something like this, but it's possible to repeat those activities. And as you see, when the action, when with some kind of finding red flag is completely not remediable, like for example, some kind of litigation issues or some kind of tax errors, you can, for example, include risks in targets valuation, or for example, create some kind of additional securities like escrow account. And when we're talking about this situation with repetition of actions, like for example, there is some kind of rules that regulates form of the contract, and for example, there is the pain of nullity, you sometimes need to redo the whole, for example, process and to, for example, conclude the agreement one more time. But there is one thing, usually it takes also involvement or of some kinds of other people, because you need, for example, to repeat also every some kind of other corporate acts that was covered after this agreement. And now, in the part of the summary, I gathered some kind of examples what you need to take into consideration when involving in due diligence. The first thing is that you need to gather a capable team from different areas related to transactional documentation preparation. Also, it's always worth considering vendor due diligence. This is the due diligence that is prepared before the whole transaction by the target on its own. You should also remember that remedial action must be taken and it should be done before the closing. Also, the documentation should be adequately prepared for the game dev sector transactions. You can use the template, but please remember that there's some kind of specific issues in game dev development. You need to achieve that the seller's representation and warranties should correspond to identified risks, for example, ownership of IP. And the last one, the responsibilities of the sellers should be defined according, and it's worthwhile to introduce additional investor securities if necessary. And the last part, please remember about, and this is the takeaway I want you to take to your home, please remember about those corporate issues, about these intellectual property rights, and that in Poland you need, for example, to make some kind of specific things in the contract, to include specific things in the contract. Please remember about areas like labor, tax, data protection, confidentiality, and nowadays definitely cybersecurity. And please remember about good preparation of documentation. This is mostly addressed to the seller, but this is very important. Good VDR is the cornerstone of good due diligence, and it's really important. And it will really benefit during the transaction, and it's really good to have some things really straightforward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Michał.
Okay, thank you. I just want to know, in video games specifically, what kind of red flags make a potential investor to strike walk away?
Strike walk away?
Yeah.
I think it depends from the stage of development of the company, but I think the most important red flag in game development, the most important red flags are related to employees, and maybe sometimes that you have some kind of contracts with your talented people, but you can really easy to lose them. But I think the most important issue is are issues related to IP rights. Like for example, when you produce some kind of IP for a long time, like for example, year or something like this, or even years, when we're talking about game development, but you don't think about threats, like for example, using open source licenses that include some kind of virus licenses. For example, this is type of license, and when you, for example, when you include part of, for example, code in your code, you need to use the same license like the author of the initial code. So in many cases, it could prevent you for make this code really commercial and to make profit on it. So I think if you don't have any like good system, maybe not a system, because I don't talk about any computer program or something like this. Maybe it's something like procedure to control creation of IP, creation of code. So this is the worst thing, because sometimes after years, for example, it will be impossible for you even to trace who is the author of the specific part of your program, and that could lead you to other legal problems. And I think IP is the cornerstone of the industry, and I think this, because for example other issues, like for example, I don't know, you have some kind of problem with your property in relation to some kind of estate or something like this. It's not a big deal. You can live without Office, but I think in game development you cannot live without people and without your IP.